little sweetheart.
They can't do nothing because I tap dance.
This is WVCR 88.3 FM, The Saint. You are listening to Calling Out Controversy, featuring hosts Andrew Hecht and Justin Kenyon. Hey everybody, welcome to Calling Out Controversy every Tuesday at 11 p.m. With me as always, Justin Kenyon.
Glad to be back.
And I'm Andrew Hecht, of course, you know my voice. So, today, Ninth Amendment, we're talking about enumerated rights and rights left to us because we decided not to give them up to the government.
True.
So that's an interesting topic for sure. We have Dr. Leonard Cutler with us, a man who's been teaching here at Siena for 50 years.
He pretty much is Mr. Siena and the professor.
Definitely right? Mr. Siena. If you had to think of anybody more Mr. Siena, I would argue it would have to be the president, but unfortunately, we have to talk about that first.
Yeah, he passed away this morning.
Brother Ed Coughlin was under surgery for a heart condition, I believe a literal hole in his heart.
One of his arteries, yeah.
And unfortunately had a stroke and passed away. I'm sure if you've been listening to 88.3, you've heard it multiple times from other hosts. Siena as a community is definitely saddened by this. A service was held here earlier today in his memory by the friary on campus.
Yep.
And some of his loved ones attended, of course. Staff and students that are here over the summer attended. It was quite touching.
Yeah. It was about a 45-minute ceremony. It was probably a majority of people on campus that are here today, from, like you said, students to faculty and everything. And it was a very touching, beautiful ceremony to see the way the community has reacted to it.
And as of right now, I don't think anybody's been named to take over. I think that's going to wait a little bit longer.
Right now, we have an interim president.
Yeah.
Margaret Madden, who was already the interim president. Well, Brother Ed was recovering, but she's now going to be the interim president all year, and we don't know if she'll either be given the role or if they'll find somebody else and give it to them.
But Margaret Madden's taking it through the whole school year?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, they announced that, I think, either yesterday or today.
So, Justin, why don't you take us through the life of Brother Ed real quick, so that way we can put him in memoriam on the show and on YouTube, and for the listeners out there, how important he was here at Siena.
Well, he's been president here for about 4 or 5 years. He was the 11th president. He continued on the Franciscan tradition where we've always had a friar be president. He came from St. Bonaventure, which was his alma mater. He also got his graduate degrees from Boston College and the Catholic University of America, where he got his PhD. He was a theologian. He was a Franciscan scholar. So he came over here, and then he was president for the past 4 to 5 years. And he's overseen a time of growth and expansion at the school. And many Siena students know him. Pretty much every Siena student knows him. I mean, Father Larry at the ceremony today said most students at other schools don't really even know who their president is, although every student knows who Brother Ed was. Yeah. Had a Brother Ed moment. He would always hold impromptu meetings in the dining hall, Lundstrom, or other places among campus. He was always very accessible and wasn't really standoffish or aloof, but that's who he was to everybody as president.
I think the best word to describe him that was used today was humble.
Yeah.
He was a very humble guy, very nice guy. I've only met him once or twice, had very brief conversations with him, but he was a good orator for all the assemblies, graduation ceremonies that we've attended, even coming as a transfer student when he introduced himself to the transferring class. He was a very nice man, and it's very unfortunate. So with us real quick is Dr. Lewis, who stopped in to say hi. Dr. Lewis, if you wouldn't mind saying a few words.
So yeah, I think you guys captured sort of who Brother Ed was as president of Siena. Right, I think the words humble are really accurate. He cared deeply about the students, and yeah, came in for Father Kevin Mullen in a time when Siena was really shifting gears. So we've seen over the last few years an expansion of the number of majors, and Brother Ed was really important to overseeing that. And so, I think all of the faculty and administrators will certainly miss his leadership, and certainly I know students will miss him as well.
Thank you. So that's what's going on in current events in our immediate area. Other current events this week, seems to be a slowish news week.
Pretty much, yeah.
There's something going on right now internationally. I believe the Australian government's investigating President Xi's brother for a financial scandal.
I didn't hear about that.
Yeah, it just came out on Wall Street Journal. We can post the link when the show goes up on YouTube, and I'm sure more will unravel as time goes on. Other than that,
Boris Johnson, new UK Prime Minister.
Yeah, we might have mentioned it very briefly last week, but Boris Johnson is now officially the Prime Minister of the UK.
Yep.
That's going to be a very interesting...
I just remember the look of shock on your face when I told you that he won.
Well, it's because it's surprising to me. You got to remember, like, Boris Johnson's first career was comedy. And
Reagan was an actor. Educated. Trump was a businessman / TV host.
Sure, but again, comedian isn't what you would think leads to
Al
presidency.
Franken was a comedian.
And he made it all the way up to senator. So, I guess it shouldn't be that shocking. It's just interesting how stuff works like that. I think it's really cool that someone can start from way outside of politics and progressively make their way into being.
Yeah, he probably should have been prime minister the first time around after Brexit. But then Michael Gove stabbed him in the back, and then he dropped out, paving the way for Theresa May. But he probably should have been the first time around. Yeah,
it's going to be interesting to see where he takes the country. Obviously, he's pro-Brexit, I believe.
Well, he helped lead that
campaign. Him and Nigel Farage, right?
Well, Nigel Farage led the UKIP party one. So they were separate campaigns, but behind the scenes they were working together. It was more him and Michael Gove and a couple other people leading the Conservative Party one, where Nigel Farage and him would work behind the scenes together.
Sure. And then he was just promoted from... He was the secretary of...
He was their
foreign minister. That's what they call it, foreign minister.
Yeah, he was their version of Secretary of State. But then he resigned after Theresa May did something with Brexit that he didn't like. And then now he came back and ran to become head of the party.
Okay, so they call it a foreign minister, where we call it a Secretary of State.
Yeah.
Okay.
All ours are secretaries, all theirs are ministers.
Okay, that's good to know. That helps. Yeah, that'll be interesting to see how that unravels. Obviously, they've been going on with Brexit since, 2017?
Something like that, yeah, around 2016.
So, late 2016, right? Like fall?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Summer, I think.
Right. So now we're at 3 years now.
Yeah.
So going on 3 years.
They have until October 31st to get the divorce agreement done.
Do you remember when Article 50 was like the big thing, or Article 50? Is it 50 or 51?
I don't remember which number it was.
Article 50.
But that was a few months ago.
Yeah, that was supposed to be in like April.
Yeah.
It was like when that's triggered, it's all gonna break loose, and
now it's Halloween.
Coming up on it.
The spookiest day in England's history.
Coming up on it. So that's crazy. I think that's it for current events. We don't really have
not much else. Yeah.
Much else to talk about. So yeah, we're going to take a quick break, as always, a short first segment, and then if you stay tuned, Dr. Leonard Cutler is going to be with us, and we're going to rock out on the 9th Amendment.
Sounds like a plan.
And just remember, you're listening to WVCR 88.3 FM, The Saint. Hey everybody, welcome to Calling Out Controversy. It's Andrew Hecht. As always, with me tonight is Dr. Leonard Cutler, an esteemed professor at Siena College. My previous professor, I think I'm going to have a class with him in the future, but this is a man who is just a plethora of knowledge on all law, but specifically tonight it's going to be the Ninth Amendment and enumerated rights. Dr. Cutler, how are you today?
I'm fine. Thank you very much for the kind introduction, Andrew.
Of course, sir, of course. You've been teaching for almost 50 years, right?
That's correct. I'm starting my 50th in September.
That's insane, man. That's awesome. So enumerated rights, what is the most important part about the Ninth Amendment to you?
To me, if you look at the language, Andrew, it's the statement that says, quote, retained by the people. Retained by the people. Because those are rights which are not specifically articulated in the first 8 amendments of the Bill of Rights, which you've been focusing on in terms of your weekly shows. This leaves a lot of flexibility with respect to what those rights are that are specifically retained by the people, but not covered in the first 8 amendments of the United States Constitution's Bill of Rights.
So now I find this amendment particularly interesting because in the looking at the framework of the Founding Fathers and how they've tried to make sure that we have as much freedom as humanly possible, and then looking and seeing that they have outlined specific rights that must not be infringed upon. Obviously, that's the First Amendment in the first 5 rights that we have that are absolute. Then you have the Second Amendment, which is an absolute right. Then you have the right to...
No right is an absolute, Andrew.
No?
No.
What would be the difference?
Congress shall make no law abridging freedom of speech, okay? That doesn't mean that under any circumstance, Congress cannot, for purposes of protecting health, safety, welfare, intrude upon that right of free speech. And we've had a whole line of Supreme Court decisions, cases, even though they may be controversial,
right,
which have indeed suggested and concluded that the rights of us to yell fire in a crowded theater and potentially cause panic, riot, mayhem, and potential loss of life, gross physical injury, that is not constitutionally protected.
Okay, so we have exceptions to each amendment, but with the Ninth Amendment, it doesn't outline a specific right.
Correct.
It outlines enumerated rights. Now, enumerated rights are rights that are inferred. And earlier, you and I were talking before the show about Griswold v. Connecticut.
Correct.
Which is the landmark case in 1965 about the Ninth Amendment.
Mm-hmm.
So can you take the listeners through Griswold v. Connecticut?
Sure.
Okay.
So what happened in that case is we're looking at birth control, okay?
Okay.
And the right of Planned Parenthood to provide contraceptive materials to individuals who so consent, these are married couples, for purposes of protecting their privacy rights. Well, the state had what is called an arcane law, all right?
Okay. Meaning
law,
outdated?
Yes.
Okay.
A law that was out of time and out of place. However, the law challenges the rights established by Planned Parenthood for privacy. So you have police power of the state, that's under the 10th Amendment, Andrew.
Right.
Versus something somewhere in the first 9 amendments dealing with privacy rights. Well, as you just pointed out, the first 8 amendments specifically articulate rights that we have. Correct?
Correct.
Religious rights, association, speech, gun rights, search and seizure, etc. Where's the right to privacy?
Yeah, it's
It's nowhere articulated.
Yep.
It's nowhere existent in those first 8 amendments. Therefore, we have the catch-all. The catch-all is the 9th Amendment, which retains certain rights, privacy, by the people. And that's what Arthur Goldberg did in his opinion, articulating the right of privacy for the Ninth Amendment. What's important, and I think we may have talked about this before, is that he not only discusses this right for us as citizens of the United States, you know, that great Leviathan that we made reference to in Washington, D.C., the federal government, because the framers specifically were concerned about national power, not states, national power, encroaching upon rights retained by the people. What Goldberg does is he takes the 14th Amendment, the due process clause of that amendment, and applies the privacy right inferred in the Ninth Amendment to the state of Connecticut.
Okay, so that's something the founders wouldn't have thought of, though, right?
That's correct. They would not have thought of. It's judge-made law. Judge-made law. Very controversial.
Yeah.
Because what I'm saying here is almost like it's oxymoronic. Under the Constitution, separation of powers, who makes law?
Congress makes law.
Congress makes law. Well, in reality, it's not just Congress. President Trump makes law.
Executive orders, right?
Executive orders and rules and regs. Correct?
Yep.
Judges make law. How? Through judicial review. And in this particular instance, critics of Goldberg and the Supreme Court majority have suggested that what the court did was take legitimate legislative power from state legislatures and place it in the hands of the court.
So now,
by judicial lawmaking. That's what Hugo Black, in dissent, Hugo Black, the absolutist that you made reference to, absolute rights.
Yeah.
Hugo Black, in dissent, attacked not only Goldberg, but his great buddy, William O. Douglas, who also argued for the Ninth Amendment, but he did so in his separate concurring opinion. I don't want to get into the weeds. He not only looked at the Ninth Amendment, but he looked at what is called penumbra rights. These are rights that emanate from other rights that exist in the Constitution.
Okay.
Okay? So the rights that are in the First Amendment, the Second Amendment, the Fourth Amendment, the Fifth Amendment fall under the Ninth Amendment.
So,
as penumbra rights.
Penumbra,
yeah.
So an example,
emanations.
An example would be like the freedom of speech also protects like what you say online.
That's correct.
That would be a penumbra right in a modern world.
That's correct.
So, when we take Griswold v. Connecticut and advance it about a decade to Roe v. Wade, what was the evolution there in terms of enumerated rights?
Okay. So, we're talking about marriage as a protected right, which allowed for birth control contraceptives as a privacy right under the Ninth Amendment.
Okay.
Again, privacy. In Roe v. Wade, Blackmun, in fact, for the majority, establishes a new privacy right.
Okay.
And that is the right of a woman to control her body, to make a decision as to whether or not to carry a fetus to term.
Okay.
However, the court made it very clear, Andrew, that this was not an absolute privacy right. That under a certain time frame, the clock ticks, and as a woman's pregnancy advances, there are situations where the state may have a legitimate 10th Amendment, that's state police power, interest in protecting not only the health and welfare of the woman, but as well, and this is very controversial in 2019, the unborn fetus. Right?
Correct.
Okay. So, first trimester, absolute. You like the term absolute? You can use it for the first trimester. A woman's right to privacy cannot be encroached upon by the state. All right?
Okay.
Regardless of what state it may be, Texas or whatever.
Sure.
Okay. Second trimester and third trimester. there are circumstances in the second trimester where the state may intercede. And Blackmun spells out what is conditional under those circumstances. Third trimester, much more important for the state to protect not only the health, safety, and welfare of the mother, but as well the unborn fetus. And that's where it gets very sticky early on in history. Right now, with, again, advances in technology in the past, 30, 40 years,
Yeah.
When does life begin?
Right.
Can we debate that it can go into the third trimester before life begins? If you're looking at what legislatures are doing, if you're looking at what's happening at the lower court level, working its way up the food chain in terms of appellate court jurisdiction, eventually to the United States Supreme Court, we're talking about life potentially beginning, right?
Yeah, all the way to a heartbeat bill, right?
That's correct. That's right.
So, Jack Quinn, who
Yes.
like I think you mentioned, a former student of yours,
Former student of mine, yes, indeed.
about 10 weeks ago came on the show.
Yeah.
And as a lobbyist, he went through the lobbying aspect of Planned Parenthood as one of the major lobbying groups, along with NISA and the NRA and that. But he mentioned briefly, because I think the current events for that day were around one of the heartbeat bills that had come out at the time.
Yeah, Alabama had one. There were several states, but go ahead.
Right.
Yep.
He mentioned Planned Parenthood v. Casey.
Yes.
So did Planned Parenthood v. Casey expand on the enumerated right to privacy?
Well, I wouldn't necessarily suggest that it expands upon it, because what happens in Planned Parenthood v. Casey, and again, we're talking about advances in science and technology. And as a result, the trimester framework that we talked about in Roe v. Wade, that Blackmun developed, cast aside.
Really?
Because it's out of time, it's out of place, it's arcane. You can't use it any longer.
Sure.
So Sandra Day O'Connor, who was a principal architect for Planned Parenthood v. Casey, her opinion, specifically talks about undue burdens that are placed upon a woman, okay, in terms of abortion. And she suggests that there are several conditions that are indeed undue burdens, but others are not. So, for example, does a woman need to get permission of her spouse to, in fact, have an abortion?
I would argue yes.
The Supreme Court of the United States says no,
Really?
she does not. That is a constitutionally protected right.
And that's currently on the books.
And that's currently on the books as a result of Planned Parenthood v. Casey, yes.
Okay.
If a woman is a minor, she's not an emancipated major, she's a minor, okay?
Sure.
Under the age of majority, does she need to get permission from one or both of her parents in order to abort?
See, I would argue no.
And the answer is yes, that is constitutionally permissible.
What? That's crazy.
Now, what the court said, and again, I don't want to go into the weeds, but what the court said was that, in fact, you're dealing with, quote, immaturity. It's unemancipated.
Sure.
It's a minor. So that's an issue.
But would that then be a better
Hold on. But if that child is, in fact, subject to potential coercion from her parents, either father, mother, or both, then what we can do is, in fact, have the child pursue what is called judicial bypass. That is permissible. A minor who is, in fact, seeking to abort and can demonstrate that there will be severe repercussions as a result of getting the information to her parents and getting her parents' approval,
Yeah.
the backlash effect, okay, can indeed instead not go through the parents and go through a court of law, through a judge, to get judicial permission. Should there be a waiting period for a woman to, in fact, pursue an abortion after she decides she wants to abort, and assuming it's within legitimate time frame.
Sure.
It's called a cooling off period, where individuals in a health clinic provide you with information. You take that information and you review it, and then you can pursue the abortion procedure. Is that constitutionally permissible?
I guess it is now. It is now.
It is now. Yeah. So you see the kinds of things that come into play here, which were never addressed in Roe v. Wade.
Yeah.
Those points never came up in Roe v. Wade. Not at all.
It's so interesting that the founding fathers had an amendment that could foresee the malleability of the law and the evolution that would come. Like, they weren't going to imagine this being the problem, but they knew a problem would come that they couldn't tell right now. And they went, here's a good way to evolve. Because it seems that with enumerated rights and penumbra rights, it gives you stepping stones. It gives you building blocks to continually keep up with the times.
Yeah, but keep this in mind too, Andrew. And again, we're going back to the 18th century with respect to the framers. What was the role of women, separate and apart from slaves, okay?
Yeah.
We know they were 3/5 part of the compromise in terms of their treatment under the Constitution. What was the role of women in the period of the 18th century?
They were homemakers and non-landowners, so they didn't have a right to vote.
They had no right to vote.
Right.
They were considered chattel. You know what chattel is?
Isn't it like cows?
Property.
Property.
That's right. Property. And in a number of instances, horses and cows were more valuable than women.
No, that's
to the man.
up. Yeah.
Especially if you're a physiocrat and you're tending to your land, like the Jeffersonians were, developing their land. That's what we witnessed back in that period of history. So women didn't have such rights to make decisions about aborting.
Right.
That wasn't even thought of by the framers. Never even dreamt of by the framers. Could never even have been conceived by the framers. No pun intended here. But that's what we're dealing with in that time frame.
Right.
So fast track to the 20th century. Now we're in the 21st century, and we have these court decisions coming down on abortion as a privacy right. It's creating one heck of a controversy. If you think about most recent terms of the United States Supreme Court and the issues that tend to reappear on the agenda of the court, one of those issues that has resonance is abortion. Right?
Yeah.
And for presidents, whether it be Trump or, for that matter, Obama, both of whom have appointed Supreme Court justices, whether they say it or not, and Trump has said it publicly, it's a litmus test for him. He's pro-life. The issue of abortion is critical. The right to life is sacrosanct, according to President Trump, and the justices who serve on the United States Supreme Court must, in fact, protect that right of the unborn fetus. Now, that's creating all kinds of controversy and issues as we look at the next term of the United States Supreme Court, right, especially with the appointment of Brett Kavanaugh and, Neil Gorsuch.
Which is interesting because in recent decisions, you see both Gorsuch and Kavanaugh take a swing left every now and then.
More so Kavanaugh, surprisingly enough, this past term, his first term on the court, than Neil Gorsuch. Gorsuch tends to be a more centrist or to the right.
Right.
With Alito and Thomas. Roberts more central and sometimes even surprising us left of central
right,
in some of his opinions. But I think the swing justice of the court could very well be John Roberts this next term.
Yeah.
And that will make a difference, very definitely, on the issue of abortion.
And do you think that both him and Kavanaugh have the potential to be swing justices?
I do. Kavanaugh surprised me, quite frankly. And
I think he surprised everyone.
He did surprise me with respect to some of his end-of-term rulings and end-of-terms of opinions, where I thought he might be on the other side, but certainly lined up. It was a weird configuration of justices on some of these issues.
Right.
At the end of the 2019 term. And I think that's a harbinger as to what we may see in 2020.
Now, in the Ninth Amendment,
Yes.
are there other enumerated rights that have been as impactful as the right to privacy?
Well, one is the right to travel.
the right to travel.
Right to travel.
I don't think
That's an inferred right that is constitutionally protected by the Ninth Amendment. But again, as I said earlier, the right to travel is not an absolute right, Andrew.
Okay.
Okay? So even though you can say, well, I have my passport, I should be able to travel wherever I want to travel.
Okay.
That's not quite the case, you see.
Okay.
But nowhere in the Constitution does it articulate the right to travel as a right that you and I have as individual citizens of the United States protected by the Bill of Rights. Well, the court articulated that right through the Ninth Amendment.
Okay.
Okay?
So that's both interstate travel and then the allowance to travel outside the country.
Correct. But you can't automatically travel outside of the country with the imprimatur of the State Department or, our national government's protection to every nation state that you wish to visit. Quite obviously, there are nation states where we do not share diplomatic relations, as you well know.
True.
And therefore, the State Department suggests and warns U.S. citizens that you could indeed face very serious repercussions by traveling to that specific nation state. And if you're taken into custody and incarcerated, there's nothing the United States government can do to protect you.
So, going off that then, wouldn't a more recent, controversial for sure, but a more recent example of national security against the right to travel be the travel ban that was initially proposed at the beginning of the Trump presidency? But people coming in as opposed to people coming out? Or does it only apply to people leaving the country and not coming into the country?
No. Travel protection exists for United States citizens, okay?
Okay.
That is part of our constitutionally protection guarantees in the first 9 amendments of the United States Constitution.
Okay.
However, you cannot automatically suggest a non-citizen seeking entry into the United States, traveling into the United States, can automatically be excluded from the United States without, quote, without a just hearing, without a just review.
Okay.
If he or she is seeking legal entry. Now, part of the controversy here has involved illegal immigrants. Illegal immigrants. That's the Trump mantra. All the illegals seeking entry coming from Central America, El Salvador, Guatemala, Nicaragua, where they're trying to, in fact, infiltrate the southern border of the United States, and they're not following U.S. law, and they're not following U.S. procedure.
Right.
Therefore, his position is, why should the United States government be forced to provide due process rights to those individuals who are entering United States borders illegally?
Okay.
That's a waste of resources, valuable resources of the United States, and very definitely it's a threat to our national security.
And that's their position.
That's the government's position.
Okay.
All right? So the question is, how do the courts resolve this? And that's part of the rub. That's part of the controversy.
You all right, sir? Okay, so that's less about the enumerated right to travel, more about whether or not a non-citizen has due process rights under the Constitution.
Correct.
Okay, so in looking at the right to travel, that probably, I would guess, is more relevant back in the day when states had different standards and different, like less uniform sets of laws, and traveling between states was a little more difficult.
Oh, yes, very definitely. I mean, interstate travel within the United States was far more difficult under those circumstances than interstate travel globally now between nation states because of protective positions taken by state governments.
That's wild to think that, interstate travel was worse than international travel. I guess because the last 200 years, so much technological development makes things so much easier now. But
it's transformed our world?
Yeah,
quite frankly.
Yeah.
The other thing I wanted to mention again, which is assumed by us,
right,
as a right that we retain as citizens of the states and the United States, again with the elasticity of the Bill of Rights, is the presumption of innocence that we have in terms of a criminal trial, a criminal case. And interestingly enough, nowhere does that exist. If you read the rights, articulated rights in the Fifth and Sixth Amendments, the principal criminal rights,
sure,
it's not stated there. It's not specifically articulated there.
See, I would have figured it's in
but
due
it's
process.
Evolved. It's assumed. It's inherent. It's inferred not only through due process, but through the Fifth and Sixth Amendments, adopted as a result from the Ninth Amendment. Rights retained by the people.
But now that didn't come under judicial review. That came under
judicial.
Oh, it did. Okay.
Oh, yeah. These are SCOTUS decisions.
Okay. So
these are all SCOTUS decisions. The right to travel, SCOTUS decision.
So what's your take then on a public trial?
What do you mean? What's my take on a public trial?
So we have innocent until proven guilty is obviously the.
You mean trial by press? Is that what you're referring to?
Well, there's that, but there's also having press inside a courtroom.
Yeah.
Which are two different versions of public trial, but both.
Well,
kind of.
Yes and no.
Yeah.
Yes and no. If you have a yellow journalistic press inside the courtroom reporting all the proceedings in a jaundiced, biased fashion, then indeed that creates a question as to whether or not that public trial is a fair trial.
But doesn't that violate the enumerated right of innocence? Because wouldn't it then force pressure upon the prosecution, or wouldn't there already be, you said, bias going into the trial?
Well, because of case law, the onus is now always upon the prosecution to prove beyond a reasonable doubt. You don't see that language anywhere, do you?
No.
No. Okay. So the prosecution has to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the individual who is being prosecuted in a public trial is guilty of the offense for which he or she is charged. Right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So what's
your point?
I guess my point would be then that in today's vast technological realm and in the information age, where we know things on the snap of a finger and information just pouring out of there, sometimes reliable sources, sometimes unreliable sources.
Fake news.
Fake news. Fake news. What do we do when we have someone, the Kavanaugh case is the most recent, for example, which is covered several times on this show, but it's the only one I can think of at the time. But what do we do when you have a confirmation hearing, for example, and the public is going after someone? Now, we've had people on the show that took a neutral stance on it. We had someone call it a character assassination. But what do you do when the public is basically trying the person while the Senate's trying to confirm them? What or the Anita Hill case with Clarence Thomas is the parallel from about 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 30 years ago now, right?
Yeah,
30 years ago. So what do we do in those instances? Do those violate the enumerated right to innocence? Because that's not technically a due process trial. It's a confirmation hearing.
That's correct. So your example would probably be better, and it's one that a student of mine analyzed in her senior honors thesis this past semester, looking at the Cosby trial and the O.J. Simpson trials.
Okay.
All right? So think about those two. Very high-profile individuals, both happen to be African-American, personalities, right? Public personalities who were on trial for commission of heinous acts.
Right.
And the question was whether or not either one of them could get a fair trial, given the circumstances of the fact that these are celebrities, public personalities,
Right.
not just individuals like you and me.
Right.
Do you, in fact, suppress the press under those circumstances? In England, they have a different system for trials.
I think it's no cameras, right?
That's correct. Now, it's not just no cameras, but there's no publication of information concerning the trial until the trial's concluded.
Really?
So what happens under those circumstances if we did that in the United States?
You'd have a lot less court TV.
You would have a major uproar with respect to violation of First Amendment freedoms.
Well, they don't have the same
here
thing.
we
right?
have, yeah, that's right. So here we have the sanctity of the First Amendment's freedom of the press, all right, and the availability of the press to public exposure for individuals in a courtroom. Now, if I'm a defendant and I'm going to be harried by the press, I don't want the press in the courtroom, do I?
No, not at all.
So I would seek to protect my right to a fair trial and my right to privacy to prevent the press from having access. So that's where the pull and tug comes into play, Andrew. And the arbiter has to be the judicial system to make a determination as to who's right and who's wrong.
Has there been
Because there have been kangaroo trials. Remember the Shepard case?
has there been a Ninth Amendment
Shepard.
v. First Amendment appeals case where they appealed a court decision based off the press violating their right to
It's usually the First and 14th Amendments if it's a state trial.
Yeah.
It's not Ninth. So it would
Okay.
be free press through due process, protecting the press from encroachment by the prosecutorial system, preventing the press from having access to the courts, the public court.
Okay.
It's not a Ninth Amendment issue.
No.
No.
All right.
First and 14th Amendment.
All right. So that's interesting. I didn't know that innocent until proven guilty wasn't a Fifth Amendment thing. It was a Ninth Amendment thing. Same with travel. Travel never even came to my mind when thinking about enumerated rights.
Yeah.
All right. So it's been a great interview. Thank you so much for coming
You're
out.
quite welcome, Andrew. My pleasure.
I can't wait to have class with you again because I got to use that book twice. But no, it's always fun. It's always such an information influx whenever I'm talking to you. Thank you for coming out. This has been Calling Out Controversy with Dr. Leonard Cutler, esteemed professor at Siena College. If you are trying to find this online, don't forget we have a YouTube channel under Calling Out Controversy. We post all of our shows after the fact. Don't forget we have an Instagram account under the same name. We have callingoutcontroversy@gmail.com where you can reach us and email us. You can email WVCR. You can find us everywhere and anywhere, not Facebook. Justin's still working on that. But thank you again for coming out. Anything you want to say before you go?
Oh, thank you for having me on the show. I really
course.
appreciate it, Andrew.
And don't forget, this has been